before, investors had to be a little bit like detectives, and they might have better data than the others. And how are they going to get alpha if they have better data than the others? To where they can do what they do best, which is about using investment fundamentals to be an investor and not worry about whether or not the data that is going to their models is correct. I think that's really positive.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Breaker, founder of Collector Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with sustainable professionals in different realms, be it government, nonprofit, academic, corporate, talk about the work they're doing against the challenges they're seeing, with the goal really to inspire other professionals, be it aspiring students coming into the profession, or kind of mid-career, or what we call the climate quitters, making a big adjustment into something that is considered more sustainable. It is so. I'm extremely excited to be having Dr. Tauni Lanier, who is the Director of Sustainability and Economic Growth International Project Groups at BDO. She's a recognized expert in the fields of sustainable finance and sustainable development in the finance sector. It's a career that started in investment banking and led to her becoming the first managing director of the Dow Jones Sustainability Group Index, but then also working with WBSCD, GRI, Impact 2030, and a host of other organizations. Beyond being just kind of someone in the corporate office, she's also someone who's founded her own organization, Eco Capital Partnership, where she combines the experience of environmental and corporate finance to create unique solutions based on business and non-traditional risk assessment. Tauni, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Perhaps the better way to start it would be a proper introduction to yourself and the work that you've been involved with.
I started my journey back in 1993. With starting my PhD, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to marry green with the banking side of things, well, the financial side of things. I'm quite numerate, so I knew I wanted to marry those two. But back then, there was no masters of sustainability. There was no PhD in sustainability, or you couldn't study corporate social responsibility, what it was back then, or social responsibility, that it was also named back then. You kind of had to make your own journey. So that's exactly what I went about doing. I knew I wanted to learn about the financial side of things. So I signed up to become an investment banker, sat on the trading floor during the Asian debt crisis, and looking at capital markets, looking at equity in debt. And then I thought to myself, okay, what else do I need to know in order to help me further on my journey? Well, I had a lucky phone call from Reto Ringer. But he started the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and he called me and he said, Tauni, I want to talk to you. I'm starting this thing off with Dow Jones. It's investment banking, but it's also around sustainability. It's around environmental issues. Would you be interested? I said, let's have a coffee. Let's talk about it. And literally, that's how it started.
Backing up a little bit, why did you know kind of early on that you wanted to marry these two things, finance and sustainability, together in the finance sector? Like, what was it that kind of coming out of school or through your research, or maybe, you did some volunteering when you're, in your teens, and how did you know that's what you want to do?
That's a pretty good question. It just seemed like that was the right thing to do. I went to the University of New Mexico for my master's degree and my undergraduate. And in New Mexico, actually in all of the Southwest of the United States, there's a very big issue around water. And nobody was talking about it. But University of New Mexico was one of the first universities that looked at water rights within the Rio Grande Valley. And to me, that was like, okay, there is an environmental issue here. And that's what really sparked my interest. And it just blossomed from there. It just happened upon me. So I knew I needed to do this journey. I knew I knew I was numerate. So investment banking made sense to me, because I'm a bit of a rule follower. So it was, how can I change things from within? I was never going to be part of the Sierra Club that roped myself to trees. Or my personality is more from working from within to change behavior, to show that actually there's another way, and that other way does have immense value. And I knew I had to put my finger on the financial side of things, because basically in the world that I live in, it's, unless there's a financial reason for doing something, a lot of people say, oh yeah, well, that's nice. Let's have coffee, but let's not talk about the environmental things of it. I knew I needed to get those crossroads, but I also knew that I needed to get some skills, kind of like a utility belt from Batman. So I had the investment banking, and then I did the Dow Jones, so I knew the equity side of things. I did the debt side of things, I knew the equity side of things, but then I needed to find out the other side of the coin. Why were companies interested in talking about sustainability or ESG back then? That's when ESG started to come out, or SRI, corporate social responsibility. Why is that important to companies? So I joined the World Business Council for Sustainable Developments, and I work with 160 of the world's largest companies about their reporting. Why do they internally think this is important to actually talk about it? I was in Geneva, so I was hopping around. I was in Zurich, I was in Geneva, I was in Singapore, um, I was in Frankfurt, and then I thought to myself, okay, I have a PhD in environmental economics. I have an investment banking in my utility belt. I now have equity because of Dow Jones. I now have the corporate side of things. There is in my opinion, a market for actually understanding the structure of this. Back then, I didn't know what it was called. It was more I was thinking about how do there's an ebb and a flow to things. There's the butterfly effect. If something happens over here, then something it triggers something happening over there. The systems approach, and I mean, I called myself, and I still do for a number of years, as a systems entrepreneur. Is how do we take a system and make it better? It's either deconstructionalist, take it apart, you put it back together.
Well, kind of talking about that, I I remember some of the early days. I remember the Morgan Stanley Sustainable Business Group, and they would put out what I think was kind of like, I would say I wouldn't say it was compliance. It's definitely understanding the risk of different investments they held and trying to make sure that they could avoid the losers. I think where we've come around though is that now we think that sustainability is a way of picking the winners. It's like this move, like I call it like the movement to industry effect. Right? Like we were moving at first, like a little ragtag group of people, like trying to, in our space, do a bit better or actually solve real problems. Now it's an industry itself, and I'm curious, like, how have you seen that change over the years? Because it did start off as like just some basic compliance, but now it really is a way to grade a whole like it's a whole spectrum of activities, and you can make much better investment decisions. So what have been like some key, I don't know, points or some key generations that you've seen through the field so far?
You're right. Before it was this kind of tick boxing thing. So, do you invest in alcohol? No. Okay, fine. Then you would be seen as a social responsible investor. But now it's so sophisticated that you have a lot of legislation regulation that's happening. So those companies that are recalcitrant are now being pushed toward doing this because they have to from a compliance point of view. I'm not quite sure it adds value, but it starts to an even playing field, if you would. The biggest challenge that I found back then, um, was that sustainability information or ESG information, the data was not consistent, was not robust, was depending on if you went to a conference, you might get different information than somebody else. So there was no standardization of the information, which made it incredibly difficult for investors who are saying we are a social investor or we are an environmental investor, because they were never sure that the information they were getting was consistent and correct. So what we are seeing is that there is more of a standardization of the data. The data is getting robuster, especially in the environmental side of things. We're always going to see that happening first as scope one, scope two, scope three. It's a lot more robust. It has it's verifiable. There's a veracity to it that is incredibly good. What is creeping in, or is the seven-headed hydra of greenwashing is starting to come in. So, they give you so much information that you're not quite sure if and it sounds correct, it might not be correct. On green hushing, where they just don't talk about it. All those types of things are starting to have happened. So, those things, the shifts are happening. But in my opinion, the best thing is we went from kind of the wild west of data, if you would, to an area that is a lot more robust. Also, innovative technologies making it easier to be confident in the data, which is incredibly helpful because before investors had to be a little bit like detectives data detectives, right? And they might have better data than the others. And how are they going to get alpha if they have better data than the others? To where they can do what they do best, which is about in using investment fundamentals to be an investor and not worry about whether or not the data that is going to their models is correct. Because there's data crap in, crap out type of scope. So I think that's really positive.
When people talk about the anti-ESG and how we're sliding backwards and how banks are all leaving this field, I keep coming back to the idea that banks are never going to give up on the data that gives them access to better investment decisions. At the end of the day, like the amount of information that you can get through this, if you're looking at it in the right lenses and you have the right queries, you have the right data sets, it's really powerful to understand from the financial sector, like who you're banking, be it from the debt side or the equity side, or who you're the merger and acquisitions that you're facilitating. Like it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yes, it is powerful. And actually it comes down to making sure not only the data is that the data is correct, but making sure that you have access to that data too. It's also important to actually recognize that gathering data is an expensive exercise. So getting data from equity multinational companies, the Unilevers of the world, is fairly easy. But if you are looking for an emerging markets transformational project investor, sometimes that data is just not there. It's just not available because gathering of that data is quite expensive. And countries are also. If you go to the OECD and you look back in the data forecasts for a lot of countries, it's just blank because they really didn't have the money to actually gather the data. But innovative technology is making it easier. IoT, so people can go out with their cell phones and capture the information, and then suddenly the gathering of the data is becoming less expensive, and opportunities are out there. So
Now, how much of that is also a function of the fact that just we've been creating this process for 15 years where it used to be a pain in the butt to get Unilever to give us stuff too, but now it's a lot easier. And also now they're giving us the information for their suppliers. Was the last 15 years really just kind of like the building the infrastructure process, and now we're moving into really the fruit gathering process, or is it still a lot more infrastructure to build?
I'm not sure. I don't have a crystal ball, but what I am saying are things that are popping up like daisies in your garden, that is making it behooves companies to look at these risks. The anti ESG, like you mentioned, those risks don't go away just because there's another name to it. Those risks don't go away. And you're right, they're greedy for risks, for risk identification and understanding it. But insurance companies are playing, I think, a pivotal role in all of this because we're getting into the era of uninsurable risks through climate change, or stranded assets through climate change. And suddenly, those things that had been seen as a value on a company's books, you have a factory that produces biscuits, but if it gets flooded every single year, your insurance premiums are going to go above what you can ultimately pay. It doesn't make it economically feasible, or your insurance companies will just say, I will not insure it. The beauty of all of this, and I think you're 15 years, just to round this out, I think what you are right is that we had to tread on a very stony path to get here. And you are saying some very brilliant green shoots in developing nations, emerging markets that are saying, we're doing it, we're doing the 2.0 of this. We are looking back to the problems that you had. We don't want to do those ourselves. How can we do this? How can we do it better here? How can we learn from what you've done?
Talk to me a little about the language of sustainability, because the way that you were just talking about, from you're studying environmental economics back in the day, there's no real path to put these two things together. You're putting it together to now actually these things are very intertwined. And now you're talking about uninsurable assets on a beach that people said we need to look at 15 years ago. How has the language changed in your view in this realm? Because I feel like we went from a bunch of screaming ninnies about the world needs our help and we should say da 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 to now like uninsurable risk and stranded assets. And I think in many ways, they're actually the same thing. It's just a language shift, and maybe even a way that we approach the language as professionals. And I'm curious how you see that over your time.
I've been doing this so long that the language has changed about 5, 6 times. So eco investing, SRI investing. Now we have impact investing. So yeah, so there's been changes, but when you scratch beneath the surface, the intentions don't change. The ideas around what is important doesn't change. And we can talk about uninsurable risks. We can talk about stranded assets. That's a financial term. If you're talking about it from a systems, then what you're talking about is a distinct erosion of value. And that value can be intergenerational. So when you scratch beneath the surface, I mean, those are the type of things that are universal, if you would. And for me, sustainability from a structure, from a systems, is universal. It doesn't matter what it's called. I mean, I realize DE and I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are fine is okay. That's kind of a no-no. And people are talking about cultural intelligence, CX, which is interesting, or cultural leadership. It's the same thing. It's just put in different clothes.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads me to the current state. There's been a lot of talk about this pushback. There's a drawdown. There's a shift away from repackaging, whatever you want to call it. You've probably seen a few of these over the years. Are things, in your view, structurally changing, or is it just the language changing, or is that those that weren't really serious or didn't know what they were doing exiting, even though they really shouldn't have been here to begin with? Like, kind of feel like now's actually not a bad time. It's actually a pretty good time to figure out what's real, what's tangible, what's actionable, and really who's on board with this versus who's signaling or who is just walking through the paces and not really giving a shit. Like, I kind of come around like we need these ebbs and flows so we can grow, we come back to a core, we grow, we come back to core, and that's actually progress in itself.
Well, I mentioned actually in my introduction is that I have been here long enough, so things go sometimes really good. But 2008 to 2010 was terrible. Was terrible to be a sustainability in the sustainability profession. It was lean. They were very lean years, and there's maybe a handful of us that actually got through the other side. I'm seeing a little bit of that. I think I've learned some of the same skill sets that I had to learn back then. I'm recognizing that I'm pulling up. And one of the things is I don't talk about ESG, I talk about risks. I talk about future proofing your company because I realize if I do talk about DE&I or I talk about ESG, then what happens is you get this glazed over look and like, thank you very much, but Dr. Lanier, but yeah. I'm now finding myself not talking about sustainability, but talking about, for instance, in my work at BDO, talking about how can we be a trusted advisor to help future-proof our companies. So if our companies say we want to be net zero, the first question I would ask is, how is that going to impact your growth plan? So it's not about ESG, it's not about net zero. It's about you've made a public statement. Your shareholders and your stakeholders expect you to grow at a certain amount. How do they jive with each other? I mean, that's part of the language that I've adapted. But for me, it's nothing new. It's just pulling out those things that I did in 2008, 2009, 2010, dusting them off, and putting them to work in a different way. There is, of course, different than now than in 2008. Like I said, we have legislation regulation, which is pulling companies to do specific things, even recalcitrant ones, which is a different atmosphere than we have now.
But what is the atmosphere? Is the atmosphere like do small things, be more practical? We're entering a recession, so focus on business, or is there still an appetite for we are aligned to this vision of a world 30 years away where water, air, food, turtles, like, and they're aligning to a long-term value set and just trying to figure out that business model. Like, what's the appetite right now?
think where there's a lot to be said is about reduction of waste. And if you don't manage your energy usage, for instance, there's a lot of waste that's involved in that. And that can be seen as directly on the bottom line. The insurance companies, like I said, if you can't get insured, then suddenly you have a risk on your book that you hadn't really anticipated. Also, there's a reputational issue because the information flows so quickly now, much more quickly than it did back then. I remember when you would write reports, and you'd write a report, and then you would make it beautiful, and then you would send it out, and people would read it for 2 or 3 months, and it would be fantastic, and people would know what you're talking about. But frankly, now it's you write a report, you have to write it in one day because the situation is changing so much that you have to put it out there quite quickly.
All right, we're gonna make a shift because I got about 10 minutes with you left, and I want to get through where we are as a movement, but also professionally speaking, some tips and tricks. So you've worked across nonprofit, for-profit, finance, coalitions. You've served on boards. Where is the sustainability profession right now? Like, is it growing and it's becoming much more part of business? Are we seeing it pulling out of business, going back to nonprofits? And who are the groups that you think have been like just doing a great job to kind of make their way through these different changes over time? Because I feel like a lot of organizations, nonprofits, they struggle to find a new business model. They struggle to find to give up on their old ideas and shift into new business platforms. Like, where are we right now? Who's doing things well, and where do you think things are going forward?
I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I can tell you what I think is happening. Richard Sandor, we had a conversation one time, and he said, as long as there's billable hours, the climate issue will never be solved. I took that to heart. I've written about it. Noticed that he was originally so. To me, that the consulting side of things is not set up to solve this issue. They're set up to get billable hours out of this issue, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Because what we are finding is that there's a morphing involved. It's not climate change issues isn't homogeneous. You solve this one thing, it's all solved. There's different eddies, there's different caverns to all these types of issues. And on that point, then I have been seeing in the last 15 years is some specialization. So you have carbon accountants now. You know, you have people that are very specific in nature positive accounting, for instance. So we were saying very specialized, so specialisms around, oh, I do this, I'm a carbon accountant. But because the geopolitical changes that we're starting to see, I'm definitely a generalist. I've seen so many things of sustainability, and I like to see it from a bigger picture, little pieces that make the bigger picture, like a jigsaw puzzle. We were not really, the more generalists weren't that in high demand, I would say, in the last few years, if you could put your finger on one specific thing. So I'm sustainable finance, definitely that's my deep point. But I'm very broad in a lot of other things when it comes to sustainability. We're starting to see this kind of movement toward more generalists again, simply because the environment, and I say environment in its much broader sense, is looking for solutions that may not come directly from carbon accounting. It may come from AI. So you have to understand, how does AI impact on carbon counting, or how does AI impact on data capture, or how does AI help or hinder greenwashing, those types of things. So you have to know a few things that you can put together into your sustainability deck of cards, if you would. So that's what I'm saying. I think you're one of them as well, that you're more of a generalist. You've seen a lot. You have a specialist in a specific region, is what you. If I need to call a friend regarding the Asian region, I would call you. Um, but but you're more of a generalist as well. You look at things from a variety of different points of view. That is becoming more and more expected, because it used to be where if you did one thing, you could say, "This is how you solve this one thing." But it's starting to be noticed that if you dig a hole um, when you want to repair, a water pipe, then it would also behoove you to get the telephone people in to put in fiber optics. Also, the cable people in to put cables in. So you have one hole, you solve more than one issue. And if you are focused on just that water bulb, so you dig that hole, you solve the water, and you pull it back in. And 2 months later, there's another hole that needs to be built. So it's looking at from a systems approach, and I think that that is going to become more and more. That is becoming more and more important because I think people feel as if the indicators, so the asking of the data, is being solved through legislation, regulation, and others. That's kind of being solved, but it's the movement from now that you have the data, what are you going to do about it, and how does it impact? How does it impact?
Yeah, and I my experience is roughly the same. I'm glad to hear the generalists are coming back because it's been nuclear winter out there for us, to be honest. And I will, and I say that both recognizing like there was a lot of pain involved, but also it was, I think, for the benefit of everybody because what I felt it was from was there was a huge regulatory push, there was a huge corporate boardroom push, investors pushing to get more information, and as they got that information, they didn't need the generalists. They need people who were specifically looking for certain things. They were developing the technologies, developing the process, developing the practice, developing the training. So you had very before you didn't have any clear standards or clear expectations, but then you did. So they had to go find that information. Now we're like, okay, we have most of that sorted. What do we do with it? For me, ESG, I teach ESG across Asia. Like you can use it as a reporting tool, and you can talk about, you can just do your basic reporting to whatever stock exchange you're doing or to your investors, and you can put up on your website and call yourself good. Or you can then learn to flip that into a scorecard on where you are as a business, where are your opportunities, where's your risk, where do you have the resources in place, and it's a business management tool. And I find like that's the more interesting time right now because actually all these boardrooms are probably feeling like they've got much better information now about issues they didn't even think were important 5 years ago that are now relevant to risk, but also opportunities like GSK or UPS, like, figuring out like how to launch a new practice, a new system, new technology. They're going to get that, I think, in part through some of the work being done by sustainability professionals. But now it's not like sustainability people selling out to sound like they're business people. They are actually identifying business opportunities.
I mean, one of the downsides actually of sustainability becoming sexy is that when I started, sustainability practitioners were very diverse. A lot of women, a lot of people of color, lots of young people, ideological people coming in and doing this. But now that it's becoming quite sexy, it's becoming less diverse, and that's a challenge for me. I mean, I'm at the end of my career, but I find that a little bit disheartening that because people are seeing it as a risk management tool, it's no longer a field for the diverse. It's field for a certain type of person can do the risk management of it. And I'm disappointed that that's the case.
Let me push back on you a little bit. And I will say this. I'll also say like everybody's their own data point. And I think we should really reflect on the fact that we all see our things around us. I would say from diversity standpoint, I see less diversity because I'm seeing more localization and less global voices. So as it filtered out from like this global movement, and I think I see a lot more youth, but I also see a lot less youth. It just depends on where I am. And I think like at the global level, I've seen less youth. So I have seen that. But the diversity for me is also because it used to be to bring everyone together for conversations globally. And it was kind of like a Star Trek kind of, environment where everyone was there and we're all kind of working. But then now it's like actually Thailand, Vietnam, ASEAN, they kind of don't need outside support as much as they used to, and they don't need to converse so much. So it feels like maybe if you're at Climate Tech or Climate Week in London or LA, it might actually be because it's a very local crowd, less so a global crowd. And I could just be reading that wrong. Like I wonder if the cops still feel very diverse, because that's one of the true remaining global platforms that brings everyone together. I don't know, like, I'm not sure if maybe that's how I just see it, because I just really travel around Asia, and for me it's super diverse, but it's also very local at the same time.
Yeah. And that's where it should be. I agree with you. But when you talk about international organizations or international meetings like the heads of state for the Commonwealth, for instance, and
Mm,
you get a panel discussion and it's about solving financial solutions to climate change.
yeah.
The MC might be a woman, but the
Hmm.
rest are all males because they sit in from they bring somebody in from BlackRock, or they bring in the
Yeah.
somebody from BP, only because sustainability is sexy now, and talking about climate change and solutions is sexy now. But the climate change solutions is built on the back of a very diverse viewpoints, because climate change doesn't sit in one place and you're only impacted by this. It moves around a lot.
Yeah.
The cops, I think you're right, are still quite diverse. It's becoming more tribal, I think, the cops anyway,
Yeah.
um, just because by the very nature they have to be. But I, what I'm seeing is the diversity of those
Yeah.
solution makers, and experts tend to be less diverse now than they have been in the past, and that to me is a little bit of a challenge.
I was going to mention this because I think the diversity isn't just about the people, it's about the spectrum of participants, or because as this has gone from movement to industry, we now want the logos on stage more than the leaders, right? And I think like that might actually be just as important as whether or not it's male or female. It's like, just by the very fact that you're bringing on only corporate compliance or corporate investor relations or corporate sustainability, but actually a lot of the corporate CSOs now, they're by and large, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but a large number are women. I can go back to Sophia, my friend Ivanka at BP. Like, there's diversity, but again, like, I feel like the biggest diversity problem I have is that it's all big branded, and the people who actually had the real voice and the experience, they can't crack through. And so I feel like and that's part defensiveness, but it's also part like, I have achieved, even if you came up in banking, I'm now a CSO and I'm now, better than I used to be. There's just so many different things happening. And I feel like maybe through this time, we'll break apart again and we'll go back to actual people who have real experience and leadership, and want to like kind of share that with the crowds in a way that's not about promoting themselves, but really like putting things together.
Yeah, where are the solutions? Yeah, that's I'm gonna think more on that one actually, Richard. That's
Kind of as a wrap up, what are a couple pieces of advice you'd have for the next generation of sustainability professionals as they're coming up?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. Just keep learning. I mean, I've signed up to Oxford's Business School next week, actually. No, at the beginning of August, to do a course on AI and sustainability. And keep your skills sharp. Remember what you're interested in and keep that very sharp. The Everything is moving so fast, but it's there if you are interested in it. Keep up to date. So it's just staying relevant and understanding where your interests lie. My interest has always been on the edge of that sustainability plate. What's next? What's coming next? How can I be part of that conversation? Yeah, but I think that's true. I think that is career advice for anyone of any career that you decide to go in, is what interests you, and stay. I wouldn't say stay relevant, because that is an onus on somebody else looking at you. What I would say is stay interested, and that is all within yourself, and what you would like to focus on. Like I said, I'm at the end of my career. I'm off the ambition train. So to me, it's all about what's keeping me interested. How can I add value? What can I share? That's what's really keeping me at least going, and the little gray cells that are in my head, trying to keep them elastic.